Moses was born into a Christian family. His parents loved him deeply and always taught him about God. They went to church every Sunday and prayed together. Moses observed them, but as he grew older, he began making different choices. Instead of following his parents' teachings, Moses chose to spend his time with many different women, going out to parties and living a carefree life. His parents noticed this change and grew worried about him. They often told him, "Moses, you need to stop this and give your life to God. You should think about becoming a pastor." But Moses didn't want to listen. "That's not my life," he would reply, eager to live freely and avoid responsibilities. One day, Moses' mother sat him down, looking deeply saddened. "Moses," she said, tears in her eyes, "I love you so much. If you don't change, I don't know what will happen to you. I might even kill myself. I can't bear to see you throw your life away." Moses was shocked by her words. He loved his mother and couldn't imagine losing her. This moment made him reflect on his choices, and he realized he needed to change, not just for himself, but for his family. Reluctantly, Moses agreed to give his life to God. His mother was relieved and grateful. "Thank you, my son. I knew you could find your way back," she said, hugging him tightly. After many discussions and some pressure from his parents, Moses finally agreed to become a pastor. He opened a church, and at first, everything seemed to go well. People came to listen to him speak about faith and kindness, and he felt fulfilled. His parents were proud, and Moses was happy to see his church growing. However, soon things changed. Another man of God, named Pastor Godwin, opened a church nearby. Pastor Godwin's church quickly filled with people, as he became known for performing miracles. Many people from Moses' church started going there instead. They heard stories of people being healed, prayers being answered, and problems disappearing. They wanted to see miracles, and Pastor Godwin's church seemed to offer that. As more and more people left, Moses' church began to feel empty. The chairs that were once full now sat vacant. Moses felt disappointed and worried. He started to doubt himself, wondering if he was doing something wrong. He didn't perform miracles in his church, he simply taught about faith, love, and living a good life. One Sunday, only a few people showed up for his service. Moses' heart sank, and he felt his confidence slipping away. He thought to himself, "Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe people don't want to hear what I have to say." That night, Moses sat down with his parents. His mother noticed the sadness on his face and gently asked, "What's wrong, Moses?" "Mom, people are leaving. They're going to Pastor Godwin's church. He performs miracles, and I feel like I'm failing," Moses replied. His mother listened thoughtfully and then said, "My son, remember why you started this journey. It wasn't about miracles, it was about sharing the message of love and faith. God has a plan for everyone. Trust in Him, and He will show you the way." Moses thought deeply about her words and realized he had to stay true to his purpose, even if it wasn't easy. He decided he wouldn't give up. Every morning, he woke up early, going out to preach to anyone who would listen. He walked through the streets, telling people about God's love and forgiveness, hoping to bring new members to his church. One morning, as he was preaching, a woman approached him. She had once been one of his most loyal members but had left his church to join Pastor Godwin's. She looked at Moses and shook her head. "Look at you, Pastor," she said. "You call yourself a pastor, but you don't perform any miracles. I used to come to your church, but I stopped. Your church is a waste of time, full of empty words. At Pastor Godwin's church, we see real miracles." Moses felt hurt by her words, but he tried to stay calm. "I know Pastor Godwin's church is popular, and people are drawn to miracles," he replied. "But the message of God is more than just miracles. It's about faith, love, and trusting in God, even when we don't see immediate signs." The woman laughed and shook her head. "Miracles are the proof that God is present," she said firmly. If you were really working for God, you would perform miracles too. That's why I stopped coming to your nonsense church." Moses' heart sank. He cared deeply for his church and wanted people to feel welcome, but he knew he couldn't force anyone to stay. Even as he tried to convince her to come back, she refused. Before she walked away, she looked at him and said, "If you want people to come to your church, start showing God's power. Words aren't enough." After she left, Moses stood there, feeling defeated. The words echoed in his mind, filling him with doubt. Maybe she's right, he thought. Maybe people won't believe in my message if they don't see miracles. Moses felt defeated after hearing the woman's harsh words. Frustrated and exhausted, he went home that night and sat with his mother. "Mom, I'm done. This is not the life I want. People are leaving my church. They say I don't have God's power because I don't perform miracles. No one is coming anymore," he said. His mother looked at him with kind eyes and said, "Moses, I know this is hard, but you need to be strong and patient. With time, your church will grow. Trust in God and don't give up." But Moses was too upset to listen. He shook his head angrily, got up, and stormed out of the house. He walked down the lonely streets, feeling completely lost. His mind was filled with questions and doubt. He wondered if he was even meant to be a pastor. As he walked alone under the moonlight, an old man suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Moses was startled. The man had a wise face, his hair and beard white as snow, and his eyes sparkled as if he knew all the answers. "Moses, my son," the old man said in a gentle voice, "I see you are worried. Tell me what troubles you." Moses was shocked. He hadn't seen this man before. "Who are you?" he asked. The old man simply smiled and said, "I am here to help you. I know about your church, and I know how hard you've tried. But let me tell you something, Moses. Pastor Godwin uses special powers to heal the sick and make miracles happen. His powers don't come from faith alone. If you want to be like Pastor Godwin and have a full church, you must go the spiritual way." Moses felt a chill down his spine. "Are you saying he uses dark powers?" he whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, Moses. There are powers that can make miracles happen, but they are not from God. If you want to make people believe in you, you can use these powers too." Moses shook his head firmly. "No, that goes against everything I believe. I want people to come to my church because of God's love, not because of tricks." The old man looked at him and smiled mysteriously. "I understand. But remember this, if you ever change your mind, just shout, 'Greatest One,' 3 times, and I will appear. I can give you the power you desire." With that, the old man disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Moses alone on the dark street. Moses walked home, deep in thought. He knew he could never use dark powers, but he also wanted his church to grow. As he lay in bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about what the old man had said. The temptation was strong, but he knew it was wrong. "I want to do this the right way," he thought. "I'll go to Pastor Godwin in the morning and ask him to show me the way. Maybe there's something I can learn from him." Moses felt more at peace with his decision and closed his eyes, hoping for a better tomorrow. The next morning, Moses put on his best suit and went to see Pastor Godwin. He had decided to ask him directly how he had built his church so quickly. When he arrived at Pastor Godwin's office, he greeted him politely. "Good morning, Pastor," Moses said. "I want to be like you. I want my church to be full like yours." Pastor Godwin looked confused. "What do you mean, Moses?" Moses took a deep breath and said, "I know you use special powers to perform miracles. Please, show me the way. Tell me how to make my church grow like yours." Hearing this, Pastor Godwin's face changed. He looked angry. "Moses, what are you saying? I don't use any special powers. Everything I do is with the power of God. You shouldn't come here and accuse me like this." But Moses didn't believe him. "Stop lying," he shouted. "Your church has only been open for a few months, and you already have 2 branches. People say you heal the sick and perform miracles. I know it's not just God's power. Show me the way." Pastor Godwin had enough. He stood up and pointed to the door. "Moses, you have no faith, and you don't trust God. You think miracles are just tricks. You're saying nonsense, and I won't allow it in my church." Moses felt angry and embarrassed. Pastor Godwin's words stung, but he tried one last time. "Please, Pastor, just show me how you do it." But Pastor Godwin shook his head and shouted, "Get out. Don't ever come back to my office again." Feeling defeated, Moses turned and left. As he walked back, he felt ashamed and confused, wondering if he'd ever find a way to make his church grow without using the wrong path. When Moses got back to his little office, he felt sad and frustrated. He thought about how Pastor Godwin had treated him and how desperate he'd become to make his church grow. As he sat at his desk, he remembered the old man's words from the night before. With a mix of fear and excitement, he decided to call him. "Greatest one, greatest one," Moses shouted. Suddenly, the old man appeared with a loud laugh, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I knew you would call me, Moses. I see you are desperate for power. Don't worry, I will help you. But first, you must go on a day journey to another world." Moses' heart raced. "Another world? What do you mean?" he asked, feeling both scared and curious. The old man smiled. "This world is full of secrets and magic, but it can be dangerous too. You will need to complete some rituals to gain the powers you seek. Are you ready for this journey?" Moses took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision. He wanted to prove himself and help his church grow, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. "Yes, I'm ready," he replied. "Good," the old man said. "But remember, you must follow my instructions carefully. The journey will be long, and you will face challenges along the way. Only the brave can succeed." With that, the old man waved his hand, and suddenly, the room around Moses began to change. The walls melted away, and he found himself standing at the edge of a dark spiritual room. Moses felt a chill run down his spine. Thinking of his church and his purpose, he raised his chin and declared, "I want to serve God and help others." At that moment, the mist parted, allowing him to grab a crystal. The moment he touched it, he felt a surge of energy flow through him. He knew he had completed the tasks, but he still wondered what would happen next. As he turned to leave, he saw the old man. "You have done well, Moses," the old man said, grinning. "Now return to your world, and you will have the power you seek. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Use it wisely." With a wave of his hand, the old man opened a portal. Moses stepped through, feeling the weight of his decisions on his shoulders. He had chosen a dangerous path, but he was determined to find a way to help his church grow. As he emerged back in his office, he held the golden feather tightly. He knew he was about to begin a new chapter in his journey, a chapter filled with challenges and power. The next day, Pastor Moses woke up with a strange feeling in his heart. He had completed the old man's ritual and was holding the golden feather. Today, he thought, I will show people the power I now hold. He put on his best clothes and went out to preach in the streets, feeling more confident than ever. As he walked, he saw a small crowd gathering around a crippled man who couldn't walk. Moses felt a surge of excitement. This was his chance to show the people his new power. He approached the crippled man and said, "Rise and walk." He stretched out his hand, calling on the powers he believed he had received. But nothing happened. The crippled man looked at him with confusion, and so did the crowd. They began to whisper, and soon laughter and mocking words filled the air. "Look at this fake pastor," one man shouted. He promised a miracle, and nothing happened. Another laughed. Moses' face turned red with embarrassment as the crowd's voices grew louder, calling him a liar and a fake pastor. Overwhelmed with shame, he turned and ran back to his church, his heart pounding with anger and confusion. When he finally reached his empty church, he slammed the door shut and shouted in frustration, "Greatest one." The old man appeared before Moses, smiling as if he'd been waiting for him. "What's wrong? Why did you lie to me?" Moses yelled, his face red with anger. "You promised me powers, but they didn't work. I was embarrassed out there." The old man chuckled. "Oh, I forgot to mention one little thing. There is another step you need to take." Moses felt a cold knot in his stomach. "What do you mean? You never told me that before." "You need to make a sacrifice, a human sacrifice," the old man said. Moses' eyes went wide. "Are you kidding me? A human sacrifice? This is madness." The old man's face grew serious. "No, it's not madness, it's power. If you want true power, you must be willing to give up what you love most." Moses stepped back, feeling scared. "Who do I have to sacrifice?" he asked. The old man looked at him closely and said, "Tell me, Moses, who do you love most in this world?" Moses' heart started to pound. He thought about his family and whispered, "My mother. She's always supported me and believed in me." The old man's smile grew dark. "Yes, your mother is the one you must sacrifice." Moses' whole body went cold. He shook his head in horror. "You're out of your mind, crazy old man. I would never kill my mother." The old man's eyes narrowed, and his smile faded. "Watch your tongue, or you may lose it," he warned. "If you truly want the power you asked for, this is the only way. You have 3 days to decide." Moses felt trapped. He wanted the power, but he couldn't even think of hurting his mother. He loved her more than anything. "What if I don't do it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The old man's gaze turned dark. "If you refuse, the power you tried to gain will turn against you. You will run mad in 3 days, and then you will die." With those words, the old man disappeared, leaving Moses alone in his empty church, his warning echoing in the air. Moses sank to his knees, his mind racing with fear and sadness. He realized that his desire for power had led him down a dark path, and now he had to make an impossible choice. Every second felt heavy, and he was completely lost, torn between his love for his mother and the promise of power. Moses went home that night with tears in his eyes, feeling completely lost. As he entered the house, his father noticed his sad face and asked gently, "Moses, what's wrong? Why are you so upset?" Moses didn't want to answer at first. He just shook his head, trying to hold back his tears. But his father kept asking, not wanting to see his son in such pain. Finally, Moses gave in and lied. "I'm losing members every day at the church," he said. "People are leaving because they don't see any miracles, and I feel like a failure." His father placed a hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eyes. "My son, you must be patient with God," he said softly. "Building something strong takes time, and faith is not about quick results. Do not let yourself be tempted into taking shortcuts." That night, as Moses lay in bed, the old man appeared at his bedside, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. He held a deep red cloth in his hands and looked at Moses with a stern, serious expression. "Take this cloth," the old man commanded, his voice cold and direct. "Go to your mother's room and cover her with it while she sleeps. Only then will the power be yours." Moses' heart pounded as he took the red cloth, feeling its strange, heavy weight. A wave of doubt washed over him, but he remembered the old man's warning: he would go mad if he didn't complete the ritual. Quietly, he tiptoed down the hall to his mother's room. She lay there peacefully. Moses hesitated, looking at his mother's gentle face, but the pressure of the old man's words rang in his head, louder and louder, until he finally pulled the cloth over her, covering her completely. The next morning, Moses' father went to check on his wife as he did every morning, expecting to see her warm smile greeting him. But today, there was only silence. When he touched her hand, it was cold. She didn't move, didn't breathe. A wave of shock washed over him as he realized she was gone. His heart broke as he fell to his knees beside her, crying out in disbelief. "Please, wake up," he whispered, his voice shaking. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched her hand, hoping somehow she would come back to him. He sobbed beside her bed, feeling a hollow emptiness where his joy and strength had once been. His cries echoed through the quiet house. Hearing his father's cries, Moses walked slowly into the room, his face tense. He saw his mother lying still and his father kneeling beside her, shaking with grief. Moses' heart felt like it was caught in a storm, pain, guilt, and fear all tangled together. He wanted to look away, but he knew he couldn't. He was the reason his mother was gone. Moses took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and knelt beside his father. He forced himself to cry, letting tears fall down his face. Some of the tears were real, for he did love his mother deeply, and now she was gone forever. But part of him cried out of guilt, for he knew he had brought this upon her. Moses whispered, his voice cracking, "Why did this happen?" His father's sobs grew louder as he held on to his wife's hand, his face filled with heartache. Moses' father didn't notice the shadow of guilt in his son's eyes. 3 days after his mother's funeral, Moses returned to his church for the Sunday service, feeling tired and sad. But when he arrived, his mood changed instantly. He was shocked to see the building packed with people. Not only was every seat taken, but many stood outside, peeking through windows and doors just to get a glimpse of the service. Moses felt a rush of excitement and smiled, feeling proud. At that moment, he thought his sacrifice had finally paid off. As the service began, Moses stood in front of the crowd, and everyone listened closely to his words. People looked at him with respect, and for the first time, Moses felt powerful. He introduced himself as Bishop Moses, proud of his new title. His words were full of energy, and people nodded along, moved by his preaching. Suddenly, a woman walked through the crowd, leading a blind man by the hand. She brought him to the front where Moses stood and asked, "Bishop, please help him. He cannot see. Pray for him to be healed." Moses looked at the blind man, feeling both nervous and excited. He remembered what the old man had promised, that with his mother's sacrifice, he would gain special powers. Moses lifted his hands and began to pray, speaking in tongues loudly, asking for the man's sight to be restored. The whole crowd was silent, watching and waiting. Then, something amazing happened. The blind man blinked, looked around, and shouted, "I can see." His face lit up with joy as he looked at the crowd for the first time. The people gasped, then cheered and clapped, thrilled by the miracle they had just witnessed. Some even started to cry with joy, and many praised Moses, calling him a true bishop. Word about Moses' church spread quickly. People who heard about the miracle wanted to come and see the bishop for themselves. Soon, his small church became the talk of the town, and more people than ever attended his services. Moses felt happy and proud of the power he now held, enjoying the respect and admiration from everyone around him. As the weeks went by, Moses' church continued to grow at an unbelievable pace. People filled the seats every Sunday, and more miracles were said to happen at each service. But Moses' father began to feel uneasy. He noticed how quickly the church was growing and started to hear whispers around town. Some people were gossiping, saying that Moses' success seemed strange, and there were rumors that he might have used his own mother for some kind of ritual. One evening, Moses' father decided to talk to him. He called Moses to sit down and looked him in the eye, his face serious but filled with concern. "Moses, my son," he said gently. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Moses looked at his father, his face turning serious as well. "What is it, Father?" he asked, already feeling a bit defensive. His father took a deep breath and said, "I've been hearing things, Moses. People are saying strange things about how your church is growing so fast. Some are even saying," he paused, not wanting to believe the words he was about to speak. "Some are saying you may have done something wrong to gain all this power, that you used your own mother." Moses' face darkened with anger. He felt insulted, as if his father were doubting him and his work. "How could you think that, Father?" he said, his voice rising. "I am a man of God. I prayed, and the power of God answered me. How could you even listen to such rumors?" His father stayed calm, though his eyes were filled with sadness. "I just want to make sure, Moses. The way things changed so quickly, it doesn't feel natural. I've seen many churches grow, but never like this." Moses clenched his fists, feeling a mixture of anger and guilt he tried to hide. "You don't have faith, Father. Instead of supporting me, you believe these lies and rumors." His voice rose again, but he didn't care. "And why don't you come to my church anymore, Father? Why don't you see for yourself the miracles that happen there?" His father sighed and looked down. "Moses, I pray for you every day. But I want you to remember one thing: there is no shortcut to true faith. Miracles don't come from just anywhere. Be careful, my son." Moses stood up, his heart pounding. "I don't need this. I'm doing God's work, and if you can't believe in me, then maybe you shouldn't come at all." Without another word, Moses walked away, leaving his father alone, feeling hurt and more suspicious than ever. As Moses left the room, his mind raced. Part of him felt powerful, proud of his growing church and the respect he had gained. But deep inside, his father's words planted a small seed of doubt, a feeling he tried to ignore. Yet, the more he tried to push it away, the stronger it seemed to grow. That Sunday, the church was packed as usual. The people waited eagerly to see Moses perform another miracle. They watched with excitement as a woman wheeled a crippled man to the front of the church. He sat in a wheelchair, his legs twisted and weak, and the crowd murmured with hope and anticipation. They had seen Moses perform miracles before, and many believed he could do anything. Moses approached the man, placing his hands firmly on his shoulders. He closed his eyes, muttering prayers in a loud, confident voice, as if to display his power. "Rise and walk," he commanded, his voice ringing through the church. The crowd watched, holding their breath, waiting to see the man stand and walk. But the crippled man remained still. He looked up at Moses, a bit confused. Moses repeated the command, this time even louder, feeling the pressure of all the eyes on him. "I said, rise and walk in the name of God." Still, the man didn't move. Whispers of doubt began to spread through the crowd. Moses' heart pounded as he tried once more, raising his voice even louder. "Get up and walk, this man," he shouted, his voice echoing, his hands trembling slightly. The man in the wheelchair looked down, unable to stand, and the crowd began to murmur, some shaking their heads in disappointment. Then one person shouted, "He's fake. He has no power." Others began to join in, calling him a fraud and questioning his miracles. The respect Moses had worked so hard to build was crumbling right before his eyes. Feeling his face flush with embarrassment, Moses turned and rushed back to his office, slamming the door shut behind him. Outside, he could still hear the crowd's voices, now louder and filled with doubt. Desperate and furious, Moses called out in a low, trembling voice, "Greatest One." In an instant, the old man appeared, standing in the corner of the room with his usual wicked grin, his eyes cold as he watched Moses with amusement. "Well," he sneered, "what's wrong, Bishop Moses?" Moses clenched his fists, his face red with anger. "You foolish old man," he shouted. "You promised me power for one sacrifice. I did what you asked, and now you've taken it away. I was humiliated in front of everyone." The old man's grin faded, and his eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, Moses, or I will make you dumb this very moment," he hissed. Moses felt a shiver run down his spine, but his anger kept him standing firm. The old man continued, his voice calm but dangerous. "Power comes with a price, Moses. Did you think one sacrifice would be enough? Power is hungry, and it needs to be fed. If you want it to stay with you, you must keep feeding it." Moses' heart sank as he realized what the old man was saying. "What do you mean?" he stammered, feeling a wave of dread. The old man's grin returned, darker and colder than before. "You need another sacrifice, Moses. Someone even closer to you." Moses' face went pale, a chill gripping his heart. "Who?" he asked, barely able to speak. The old man's eyes gleamed with a sinister joy. "Your father," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Moses' knees felt weak as he shook his head, horrified. "No, not my father. I can't do that." The old man's face grew dark, his grin disappearing. "You have no choice, Moses. You wanted power, didn't you? You wanted respect. Then do as I say. Bring your father as the next sacrifice, or everything you have built will come crashing down. People will see you as nothing more than a powerless fool." Moses felt trapped, torn between his love for his father and his hunger for power. He thought of his father, who had always supported him, even when he was suspicious. The thought of harming him filled Moses with a deep sadness, but the temptation of power still clung to him, clouding his mind. The old man leaned in close. "You have 48 hours, Moses. If you do not bring your father, I will take everything from you. Your church will fall, and you will suffer until you beg for mercy." With those final words, the old man disappeared, leaving Moses alone in his office, shaking with fear and confusion. He sank into his chair, his heart pounding as he thought of the crowd outside, the people who had once believed in him, now doubting his power. Yet the price of that power was now tearing his life apart. For the first time, Moses felt truly lost, caught between his love for his family and his dangerous quest for power. Without thinking twice, Moses did as the old man instructed. That evening, when he prepared dinner for his father, he slipped a special powder the old man had given him into the food. Moses' heart raced, but he kept his face calm as he placed the food in front of his father. His father, tired after a long day, sat down at the table, ready to eat. Moses watched closely, barely breathing, as his father picked up his fork. But just before he took a bite, his father paused, put his fork down, and bowed his head in prayer. "Dear Lord, bless this food and keep us safe. Watch over us tonight." Moses felt a jolt of fear. What if his father's prayer was strong enough to stop the powder from working? He tried to push the thought away, but as his father ate, he began to worry. After dinner, his father seemed unusually tired. Moses watched as he yawned, rubbed his eyes, and slowly got up to go to his room to sleep. This must be it, Moses thought. By morning, it will all be over. That night, Moses could hardly sleep. He tossed and turned, imagining the power he would gain and the respect he would finally have. But as morning came, his excitement turned to nervousness. What if something went wrong? As he sat in the living room, still half expecting bad news, he suddenly heard footsteps. His heart stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound, and to his shock, he saw his father walking toward him, looking perfectly fine and cheerful. "Good morning, Moses," his father said with a smile, stretching and yawning. "Did you sleep well?" Moses' mouth fell open, and he couldn't speak for a moment. His mind raced. How was this possible? He was certain the powder would work. "Good morning, Father," Moses managed to say, trying to hide the shock on his face. His father didn't seem to notice anything strange. He simply poured himself a cup of tea, humming to himself, completely unaware of Moses' panic. Moses felt his heart pounding, his mind spinning. Had the powder failed, or had his father's prayer protected him somehow? He returned to his secret office, heart racing, and stood in the dim light, calling out, "One, greatest one." The old man appeared before Moses, his smile wide but not reaching his eyes. "Moses, you've summoned me again. What troubles you now?" Moses' voice trembled with urgency. "My father is still alive. I followed your instructions, but the powder didn't work. What must I do to gain the power I desire?" The old man's expression turned serious, and he leaned closer. "Your father's spirit is strong. He has a deep faith that protects him," he said. "Then what can I do?" Moses pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. The old man's smile faded, and he looked at him with a serious expression. "If you truly want the power you seek, you must give up something even more valuable." Moses felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean?" he stammered, already feeling a sense of dread. The old man's eyes glinted with a cold, calculated look. "Your manhood, Moses, the ultimate sacrifice." Moses' face went pale, his body stiffening in shock. "My manhood," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Yes," the old man replied, his voice calm and steady. "This is the price of true power. Are you willing to pay it?" Moses felt dizzy, his mind racing. This was too much, too far. The thought of losing such an important part of himself made him feel weak, but he also remembered his hunger for power, respect, and everything he thought he deserved. Moses made the decision to go ahead with the sacrifice. He felt a mix of fear and excitement as he prepared for what was to come. The old man guided him through the dark ritual, and, with a swift and painful process, Moses lost his manhood. It was a heavy price to pay, but as the days passed, he began to feel different, powerful. Soon after the sacrifice, Moses' church started to grow rapidly. People came from all over to witness the miracles he performed, and word spread quickly. Soon, he opened a new branch of his church in Lagos. Moses was thrilled as he stood before large crowds, preaching confidently and performing what he claimed were miraculous healings. He felt like a true bishop. One Sunday, after a particularly busy service, Moses' father came to visit him at the church. He looked around in awe, amazed at how successful Moses had become. "Son, you've done so well for yourself," he said with pride. "Your church is thriving. Why don't you think about getting a wife? A family would make your life even more fulfilling." Moses smiled politely but shook his head. "No, Father. The Lord has not revealed the right woman for me yet," he replied, trying to sound convincing. Inside, though, he felt a twinge of doubt. Was it really the Lord's will, or was it just his own fear of attachment? His father nodded, though a look of concern crossed his face. "You know, having someone by your side can bring joy and strength. It's important to have love in your life." Moses brushed off his father's words. "I have my church, and that is my focus right now. I need to continue my work and spread the gospel." As the weeks went by, the church continued to grow, and Moses enjoyed the admiration of his followers. Yet, late at night, when the crowds had gone home and silence filled the church, he sometimes felt lonely. Despite his success, there was a part of him that wondered if he had made the right choices. But every time those thoughts crept in, he pushed them away, reminding himself of the power he now possessed and the respect he had earned. He was determined to stay focused on his mission, even if it meant sacrificing love and companionship. After all, he had paid a high price for his power, and he wasn't about to let it go. One day, as Moses was greeting members after a Sunday service, his eyes fell on a young woman named Mercy. She was kind, dedicated to the church, and always eager to learn more about faith. Moses felt an immediate connection to her, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As weeks passed, Moses and Mercy started spending more time together, talking after services and even meeting outside of church. Moses felt truly happy in her presence and realized he was falling in love. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so close to someone, and Mercy's warmth made him feel alive in a way that preaching and miracles never had. Eventually, Mercy noticed Moses' growing affection, and soon they began dating. She loved how dedicated Moses was to his church and respected his commitment. However, one day as they were talking, she brought up the topic of intimacy. She looked at him with a shy smile and said, "Moses, we're in love. Don't you think we should meet in the upper room?" Moses quickly cleared his throat, looking deep into her eyes. "Mercy, I believe in doing things the right way. I think we should get married before taking that step." Mercy respected Moses' faith and commitment and agreed, thinking it was because he was a man of God. She smiled and nodded. "All right. I'll wait. I admire your faith." Moses felt relieved, grateful that she understood. But deep down, he knew there was more to his hesitation, a truth that could change everything if she ever found out. Just 3 months later, Moses and Mercy were married. Moses' father couldn't hide his excitement. One evening, as they all sat together after a family dinner, his father leaned over with a warm smile. "Moses, my son," he began, "I can't wait to carry my grandchildren. It will be such a joy for me to see the next generation." Moses forced a smile, nodding. "Me too. I look forward to starting a family with my dear wife." Mercy, seated beside him, reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with joy and hope for the future. She too dreamed of having children, filling their home with laughter and love. But as Moses spoke, a pang of worry stirred within him, knowing the truth he hadn't shared. Weeks turned into months, and a quiet worry began to grow inside Mercy. Since their marriage, Moses had not once made any move toward her. At first, she thought it was just part of his strong faith, or perhaps he was waiting for a special moment. But as time went on, her patience turned into confusion, and her confusion into insecurity. One evening, Mercy decided to confront him. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts, and went to him as he sat in his study. "Moses," she began softly, "I need to understand something. Why haven't we, shared any intimate moments? We're married now. Is there something wrong?" Moses paused, caught off guard by her question. He looked at her with a forced calmness and replied, "The Lord has not given me the instruction to take that step yet, Mercy. We have to be patient and follow His guidance." Mercy tried to smile, but his answer only left her feeling more confused than before. As she returned to her room that night, her mind raced with thoughts and questions. She looked at herself in the mirror, wondering if there was something wrong with her. Was she not attractive enough? Was she not what he expected? Dear viewers, do you think Mercy will ever discover the truth about her husband? What do you think her reaction will be? Leave a comment with your thoughts, and stay tuned for part 2. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you won't miss what happens next.